Hi, I'm Michael Killen. I turned on CNN today, and I think it's 20 people now have been recorded as having been killed by the mudslide in Washington State. And then I listened to the earthquakes down on the western coast of Chile. And I remember yesterday, or the day before, there were also earthquakes in Los Angeles. And about a week or two ago, I was reading in the New York Times, and the United States Geological Survey predicted that Boston, New York, Norfolk, Virginia are high-risk areas for the impact of sea level rise. And then I've been associated with some members of the United States Geological Survey, and they have been telling me that the Delta, the California Delta, the heart of the California plumbing for the water for much of the state, is also at risk from sea level rise and salt water coming in and really basically destroying the Delta, or an earthquake striking and breaking the levees and also basically destroying the water of much of the state of California. So with all these perturbations, all these things that are happening, I thought it might be good if I invited a member of the United States Geological Survey to come on this program and help us understand what is happening. And so John Stock is my guest tonight. I'm going to ask him a series of questions about these, let's say, disasters, see what he calls them. And then I found out he's also the head of innovation for the USGS in Menlo Park, California. I want to ask him some questions about how he goes about innovating. John.
Michael, thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. So if we were to put together, classify all of these kinds of disasters that are occurring everywhere, what would you call them?
Well, we live in a world where there are slow and fast geologic disasters. They're both threats to our human infrastructure and sometimes to our lives. Recently, we've heard about some of the fast ones. These are threats to people's lives, from the hillside falling down, the landslide up in Washington, from the earth shaking very suddenly, the earthquake down in Southern California. And you can juxtapose those against a whole different class of disasters, which are the slowly creeping ones. These are the ones, the drought in California is a disaster in that sense. And sea level rise, the slow incremental movement of the sea up the shore, is another slow-moving disaster.
And you put climate change in the slow-moving or disaster?
Climate change has the ability to do both in ways that are very hard to untangle. Sea level rise is inherently tied in some ways to climate change, to the warming of the oceans and the expansion of the oceans, and to the movement of water from an icy form into the sea where it rises to sea level. So there's a slow one, and at the same time we recognize that the threat of severe storms, most of our models show that big storms will be more frequent in our future. So climate change brings both fast and slow ones.
So you mentioned water, maybe the ocean. The acidification of the ocean, is that a threat that your organization is concerned about?
That is a threat that many scientists who worry about the future of coral reefs and all the other life that depends on them is concerned about. That threat means that in the coming years, all of the ecosystems that depend on coral reef, the fisheries, and all those things may be at threat. So we worry a lot about that.
Okay. Now, I've heard you use, or people from your organization use, the word hazards. And I've always used the word, or thought, well, if some water spills on the floor in the bathroom and I get out of the shower, that water is a hazard. But you use the word, I think, hazard to categorize earthquakes, sea level rise, climate change, and is that right?
Well, your example is a pretty good example of a hazard. The ones I deal with are natural hazards, and those are the ones that humans often don't have a say about. You can keep the water off your floor, but it's a much more difficult proposition to keep the San Andreas or the Hayward Fault from rupturing. So the The kind
Okay.
we deal with are inherently messy, difficult hazards that can influence many, many people.
So you say you, as part of the United States Geological Survey, which I believe is part of the Department of Interior, you deal with them. What do you mean you deal with them?
Right, we have different branches in the survey. Some of them are focused on earthquakes, some on landslides. They all are tasked with the same thing, which is to reduce the nation's exposure to those hazards.
Reduce the exposure by, well, you can't move the faults around or keep
right.
them in place, and maybe you can't even keep the mudslides from happening. But how do you help the nation, me, other voters, reduce our risk with respect to them?
Well, let me give you an example. We try and answer 3 basic questions, and we follow the prescription of just the facts, ma'am. So we don't advocate. We try and tell the public, here's the facts. The 3 questions we like to answer for hazards are, where are they? When are they going to happen, to the extent we can figure that out? And then how big will they be? And to the extent that we can answer those, it gives people the ability to engineer solutions and also to keep themselves out of the path of some of those hazards if they're informed.
Can we go over that? The first one is where they are,
Yeah,
when they might happen,
yeah.
and
And how big they're going to be.
how
Yeah.
big they're going to
So
be.
is an earthquake going to be a small one that we can all, get a rattle out of, but not much more, or will it take down your house? I mean, we need to know those kinds of questions so we can evaluate the exposure of our communities to those geologic hazards.
So let's take buildings, high-rise. Before a planning department of a government and the architects, the builders, the developers, etc., decide to build a 60-story building, someone, or maybe all of them, do they seek out the research that your organization has produced about a particular area, and you folks might say, this is an area that is likely to have an earthquake in X number of years, or the ground is going to sink, or you just can't put a foundation there that's going to, is that what you do?
In fact, the state of California has a long experience at dealing with these hazards, and so what they do is create the laws that help guide safe building. And so those laws tell builders and designers and architects, if you're building in this place, the United States Geological Survey says you have to worry about this strong an earthquake.
And then you have to build accordingly, or you don't build.
Well, that is how it should work, yes.
So the mudslide in Washington State, did your organization issue data at some point in time that this land is not stable under certain conditions?
The landslide in Washington had a long history of smaller failures, and it belongs to a class of landslides that I refer to as pathologic landslides, in the sense that they behave in a way that we think we can understand for a long time. They fail in small ways that don't threaten people's lives, and then all of a sudden, for reasons we don't understand entirely, they fail catastrophically, killing people and destroying the infrastructure. And those landslides are very difficult. La Conchita, which you may remember in 2005 in Southern California, which killed around 10 people, is a similar kind of example.
Okay. Now, I personally am interested in the California Delta, okay?
Yeah.
And you would classify sea level rise from the San Francisco Bay coming up and having the sea water, what is the word you use?
That's right, incursion. Yeah.
Incursion. You would define that as a risk, as a hazard.
I think it's a hazard to the ecosystems of the Delta that have grown up in balance with the old way, the way it was before things started to change as rapidly as they're now changing.
But what about to the water?
Well, we expect that there will be threats from high water levels to the levees, and if you add those to the threats to those levees from earthquakes, then there are reasons to be concerned about the safety of the Delta, and the state and the federal agencies are looking carefully, and I hope that I hope that conversation and that research drives actions that people can live more safely in that place, because it is a threat in the long term.
Okay. And what is your particular area of study with respect to hazards?
Right. I'm a geomorphologist, and I study things that go bump in the night. So that would be landslides, debris flows, which around the Bay Area people may remember as mudslides. I study pollution from erosion. I try to understand the rapid release of sediment from steep places in the world and how that threatens people and ecosystems.
So you are a geologist. And
I am a geologist.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to school at University of Washington, and then for a PhD I went to the University of California at Berkeley.
Okay. But I mentioned early on, you are also, you're the director of the Center of Innovation?
The Innovation Center for Earth Sciences, that's right.
Okay. So that's not necessarily a scientific function. It's more of a, let's say, a management function, or running a center on innovation.
What do I do? Right. Well, I mean, the goal of the center is to create the next generation of tools to solve these problems that confront the nation, the problems we've been talking about: landslides, sea level rise, climate change. And part of my goal is to make serendipity happen to solve those problems. And the way I do that is by pulling scientists and engineers together and starting a conversation. We do it at workshops. We've got one coming up on December 12th of this year on hazards. And in those workshops, we try and get that conversation going where the scientists talk about the things they wish they knew better, and the engineers talk about the tools that they develop that may be able to solve those problems.
As we started this discussion about innovation, you said something to the effect, you try to help in the development of new tools that can be helpful to folks. But tools are tools,
yes.
and we can go into tools in a moment, but are you also working to help developing the thinking process of the scientists?
Well,
okay.
it turns out that one of the great challenges, and there are many companies here in the Valley that are confronting this challenge, is the huge amounts of data that our new sensors bring to the table. And one of the challenges, can we sort through that data in a way that we can effectively recognize risks to us? And so that's an innovation challenge. It doesn't revolve around hardware. It revolves around how to understand the data. And there are huge resources here in the Valley that the survey is collaborating with to try and understand that, including Carnegie Mellon, NASA Ames, and many others.
Okay, so you're concerned with gathering a tremendous amount of new relevant information, and then you're also concerned with how to process it, how to get some meaningful insights from it. Could we just, can I ask you, what are the new approaches to gathering information?
Let me give you a great example that I'm very excited about. A close colleague of mine, Ben Brooks, is working with Bobby Annucci down at Carnegie Mellon, and what they're trying to do is see if we can use our cell phones to warn us about the oncoming waves from earthquakes. Now, this is not a technique that will predict when the earthquake will happen, but once the earthquake has started, millions of people in a big urban area have cell phones, and those cell phones can provide everyone else advanced warnings.
So it's not just your friend or your colleague's cell phone and your cell phone, it's millions of people. And in other words, it's sort of
It's crowdsourcing, yeah.
And so if the phones start to ring, let's say in southern Los Angeles, and then they start to ring in a little further north or east or whatever, but are you thinking in terms of having people initiate the ringing, or having the manufacturers of cell phones built in sensors that would automatically...
Well, very conveniently, the manufacturers of cell phones have accelerometers in order to prevent your phone from being damaged when it falls. And so those accelerometers can also serve the purpose of telling us about oncoming strong motion. So we use what's already in there.
How far are you along in taking advantage of the sensors that are now in the newest cell phones? And
well, I think that we're in a brave new world, because there are many sensors that can be added on, and so we're exploring how far we can push citizen science. And that's exciting, because that's science that can be done for far lower cost and yet benefit huge amounts of people in the nation. Now, we don't want to do that exclusively because we recognize the power of the other science. But that citizen science, we need to explore that because there are challenges that we're facing that we need folks' help on, and that gives us a chance to do that.
There's challenges where you need help. Are you saying by any means that the world has changed a bit and there are more hazards emerging and you want more, therefore, you know, I know Congress doesn't want to give the Department of Interior and scientists a lot of money. So do you think there's a lot of more hazards coming our way and therefore you want to get more help?
Well, I would say that our exposure to hazards is greater because people now live in places high in the mountains where we didn't used to live. And so we're more exposed. We're more exposed at the seashore where, you know, sea level rise is an issue. And we know that we have scarce resources to solve those problems. And to the degree that we can use the technology here in the valley to bring citizens into that process, it means they're more involved in understanding the challenge, and it also means we can do better science.
Okay, so I heard that you want to take advantage of the great numbers of cell phones. So that's sort of cell phone technology and GPS.
One example, yeah.
And to have more sensors. I know you folks have had a lot of sensors out there over the years, and you folks had to put your backpacks on and go with your tent
Still
and
do,
live.
Still do.
Okay, so I can grasp the use of the GPS systems with the cell phones and maybe the internet and the sensors, vibrate, whatever, as new tools. Are there any other new tools that?
There are many other new tools because along with cell phones comes the ability to use the cell network. And that means that we can take small sensors, small cheap sensors that we consider expendable, that we can afford to lose, and we can put them in the dangerous places of the world. So for instance, we have developed a new sensor that costs a couple $100 to make using technology here from the Valley. We can put that sensor up on the steep hills above Los Angeles, and then we can have a sense of when the next big debris flow might threaten the homes below. And we can talk to that sensor through the cell network cheaply.
Okay.
So that not just cell phones, but all the technology that goes along with it allows us to reach into the world we never had before.
Okay, now I attended one of your events where I guess he was the head of the Silicon Valley Carnegie Mellon University on the Moffett Field. And I tend to believe or think that Carnegie Mellon has always tried to push the envelope of artificial intelligence, robotics, and computing. And then they also used to like to say, maybe they still do art as well, but for this discussion, what do you expect or are getting from the Carnegie Mellon resource out here?
What we get from them is their students are so excited and have so many new and interesting ideas that we can connect with our national science needs. They're thinking about things in ways that most other folks haven't because of their exposure to the workplace here in the Valley and to the culture. And so it's like an injection of vitamins is my way of thinking about it. So they're not necessarily going to help us solve, when earthquakes happen, but what they are helping us solve is how to deal with all the new information technologies descending on us and how to do it in a way that's socially intelligent.
Okay, so you're not looking for them for the robotics or the
we do.
Artificial intelligence. Okay, but you're also looking for intellectual.
This is that other side of innovation that you mentioned earlier, not the hardware, but the people side of it. That's so important to how you view the world, and artists probably know that, I would guess, better than anyone.
Could you tell me one type of intellectual help you are getting from Carnegie Mellon?
Well, the crowdsourcing of earthquakes example I referred to earlier is possible in part because of the folks at Carnegie Mellon who understand the way those cell networks work.
Okay, and how people are using them?
And the important part of any warning system ultimately is how you connect with the people you're serving. And that social aspect of it is something that is very difficult to do. And that's where the social media and the social intelligence of folks in that group of working and combining technology with people's interaction with it.
Oh,
That plays a huge role, I think.
And I remember seeing, maybe he was the head of MBARE. And
Krisholan, that's right.
And maybe you could say what MBARE stands for.
Right, so the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, and their mission is to adapt technology to understand the oceans. So in some ways, it's very, they're a much larger and successful version. The Innovation Center is very small compared to them.
Would I be correct to say the main way they research, they have these underwater devices and mostly underwater that go traveling around, and they're tethered to massive electronic networks, I guess?
Or not tethered, yeah.
Okay. And so what are you hope to get or are getting from them?
A lot of excitement. The tools that they've developed down there to look at the ocean are applicable in the nation's waterways. So for instance, there's a concern that we want to identify very rapidly when there's something hazardous in our waters, and particularly a pathogen. And the folks at MBARE, Krisholan in particular, has developed a system that does near real-time genomics. So they can put their sensor in the water, and it can phone home in an hour and tell you there's something bad in the water. That could be used in our nation's riverways.
Oh, real threats to the waterway.
So now we could have a real-time warning for all the nation's rivers about any potential pathogens coming down the river. And this is something that MBARE has spent many years developing. But here's a repurposing of it in a way maybe no one had thought of, but brings the power of that technology to serve the nation and solve a problem.
I was talking to some farmers of clams up in Bodega Bay, and they said to me, we were talking about acidification of the ocean, and they said they get warnings when water is coming their way that's acidified. Is MBARE, to your knowledge, working on?
The purpose of what they call their environmental sensing platform is to provide advanced warning for harmful algal blooms and for other toxic conditions in the ocean. So that is a technique that could be applied to many different water quality issues. And our hope is to bring it into the nation's waters so that we have this real-time alerting capability of telling folks when a pathogen is coming down the river.
Okay. You and I were at an event at NASA where I gave a speech, and I don't hold myself up as a lawyer,
it was a great speech,
a doctor, or a scientist, but I made a statement that I felt the United States, the federal government, etc., NASA did not really have a handle on where all the methane was coming up. And I think I made a statement, methane is now coming up maybe more than ever in the ocean. And is MBARE involved in trying to measure and quantify and?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. The issue you're talking about, methane clathrates, are a particular concern around the Arctic, where sea level temperature is rapidly rising, and so it is a thing of concern. I don't know MBARE's role in it.
And then I chuckled. 2-3 days later, I saw in the New York Times that the Obama administration is now going after methane, which I don't know how I was so lucky. The acidification of the ocean, that is caused by absorption by the ocean of carbon dioxide, is that?
That's my understanding as well. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I believe in December you're having a major event, and an event where I think you want to bring in a lot of different scientists and technologists, etc., for your serendipity thing to happen, which I think is a key, very fundamental innovation. You get new information from different sources, and all of a sudden, wow, there is an epiphany, and okay. So what's going to happen at that event?
Well, the theme of that event is geologic hazards. And so the effort there on, it's Friday, December 12th, the effort there is to pull in our scientists from across the USGS who work on different kinds of hazards, floods, earthquakes, landslides, sea level rise, tsunamis, and to have them talk about the things they don't know how to measure or want to measure better. And we're hoping that folks in the audience will come and participate in the conversations that happen, as well as the engineers and technologists that will present tools that may be able to solve those problems.
So
So
Yeah.
making serendipity happen, that's the goal.
Yeah. So I heard you sort of invite the public, okay, but will this be an event where the scientists are mostly talking to the scientists?
It largely tends to be a pretty pointy-headed conversation. So the scientists gather around posters or other presentations of their work, and they can get pretty pointy-headed pretty fast.
Yeah. So I attended several of the speeches, but this was not the workshop, but I attended a speech on a gentleman from your organization from down in Sandan, Khan, which I think
Can, that's right.
which his speech was a prelude are we experiencing a prelude in California to climate change?
Yes.
And I want to say I found it extremely interesting. And again, I don't hold myself up as a scientist, but as a layperson, I learned an awful lot. And I've been left with some questions. He talked about that they're drilling like mad now for water in the San Joaquin Valley, the farmers, and they're drilling so much that you have to get online and it could be months before a driller will fill your needs. And I'm now thinking about the aquifers. How threatened are they?
I wish I could answer that.
Okay.
I mean, I think that you brought up a really big concern, and that's something that I know the state is looking at. But you know, that falls outside my area of expertise, I would say.
Okay, so I have a better understanding of the United States Geological Survey. You folks are studying the air, the water, the land, and probably other things, and you're doing a tremendous amount of science, and you're making that science available to all of us. And it's up to us and politicians and other folks to make sense of that knowledge. And if we do use that effectively, we'll all be safer and more successful. So, John, you've been a wonderful guest. My guest has been John Stock. He is from the United States Geological Survey in Menlo Park, California. And in December, Friday the 12th, his organization is putting on an important event, and I'd keep watching for it. I'll be there.